The night the baby girl was born, the wind outside howled against the walls of the small, crooked cabin like it was trying to warn the world. The roof creaked. Dust drifted down from the rafters with every gust. Inside, a single oil lamp burned low on the table, throwing a weak yellow light over the bed where Emma lay, her face slick with sweat, her hair stuck to her cheeks. The cry of the newborn sliced through the tired silence, thin, fierce, desperate for life. Emma's hands shook as she cradled the tiny bundle against her chest, her fingers tracing the baby's soft cheek. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, voice raw and hoarse. "Mama's here. Mama's got you." The baby blinked, as if the world was too bright, and let out another sharp cry. Emma smiled through tears, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. She dreamed of this moment for months, holding her child, whispering promises about a better life, a kinder world. But dream and reality were different things, especially in a house where love had dried up years ago. The door slammed open, banging hard against the wall. Emma flinched, clutching the baby tighter. Hank stood in the doorway, his shadow swallowing the light behind him. His face was the color of old leather, cracked and hard, his eyes red from whiskey and late nights. He didn't look at Emma first. He looked at the baby. His gaze slid over the tiny pink face, down to the small wrinkled hands, then narrowed. "Well?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "What is it?" Emma swallowed. Her mouth felt like cotton. She's a girl, Hank." For a heartbeat, everything went quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Hank's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring. He stepped closer to the bed, the floorboards groaning under his boots. "A girl," he repeated, like the word itself offended him. Emma nodded, her arms tightening instinctively around the baby. "She's healthy," she said quickly, her words tumbling over themselves. "She's strong. The midwife said she's doing just fine." "That's—" Hank's hand flashed out before she could finish. The slap echoed off the wooden walls. Emma's head snapped to the side. A sharp, hot sting exploded across her cheek. The baby started wailing, her tiny body trembling against Emma's chest. Emma bit back a cry of pain and blinked rapidly as tears filled her eyes. Hank leaned over her, the smell of whiskey thick on his breath. "You had one job," he growled. "One. I needed a son. This land needs a son. My name needs a son. And you give me this." His hand gestured wildly toward the baby, like she was some sort of insult. Emma's throat burned. "She's not a thing," Emma whispered. "She's our child." "She's no child of mine," Hank snapped. His voice rose, rough and ugly. "You done cursed me, woman. My brothers got sons. Men in town got sons. What do I get? A useless girl who can't carry my name." He reached out as if he might grab the baby, and Emma's heart seized. She twisted her body, turning away, shielding the newborn with her arms. "Don't you touch her," she gasped. "Please, Hank. She's just a baby. She didn't ask to be." His fist caught her in the ribs this time. Pain shot through her side, white-hot, stealing her breath. The lamp on the table rattled. The baby's cries rose in pitch, raw and terrified. Emma fought to stay upright, to keep her arms steady, to make sure the baby never slipped. "You think you get to tell me what to do in my own house?" Hank roared. "You think you get to defy me after failing me?" He hit her again, then again, the blows landing against her shoulders, her arms, her back. Anywhere he could reach that wasn't the baby. Emma curled around her daughter as best she could, every muscle screaming, every breath a battle. "Please," she choked out. "Please, Hank, stop. You're scaring her." "Good," he spat. "Maybe she'll understand she wasn't wanted." Outside, the wind pushed against the door as if it wanted to come inside and help. No one came. No one ever did. Their nearest neighbor was a mile out, and even if they heard something on a night like this, they'd tell themselves it was just the storm. Folks had a way of minding their own business out here, even when someone's life depended on it. Hank finally stopped, chest heaving, eyes burning with an anger that looked older than both of them. He staggered back from the bed, rubbing his hand over his face. "You'll get up tomorrow," he said flatly. "You'll be in that kitchen, same as always. And you'll figure out what to do with that girl so she doesn't get in my way. I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear her. You got that?" Emma could barely nod. Her body was shaking, her mind buzzing with fear and pain. He stared at her a second longer, then turned and stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind him so hard the walls shuddered. For a few seconds, all Emma could hear was the ringing in her ears and the frantic beating of her own heart. Then the baby's cries broke through again. High, trembling, needy. Emma forced her muscles to move. She shifted, biting back a groan, and lifted the baby so the little face was close to hers. "Shoo!" Emma whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Shoo, baby girl. Mama's here. Mama's not gonna let nothing happen to you." The baby squirmed, her fingers curling around the fabric of Emma's gown. Emma pressed a shaky kiss to her daughter's forehead. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry you had to come into this kind of world. But I swear to you, I won't let him break you. I won't let him break us. Do you hear me?" The baby's cries slowly settled into softer whimpers, then hiccups, then tiny sniffling breaths. Emma rocked her gently, even though every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her ribs. She stared up at the crooked ceiling and felt something harden inside her. Fear had lived there for so long it felt like part of her. But now, as she looked down at the fragile life in her arms, something else rose up beside the fear. Determination, anger, love that felt like a steel wire, thin but unbreakable. By the time morning came, the wind had died down and left the sky a cold, pale blue. Emma's body screamed with every movement, but she swung her legs over the side of the bed and forced herself to stand. The baby, her baby, lay swaddled in a faded blue blanket, sleeping with her tiny mouth slightly open. Emma watched her for a long moment, memorizing every detail. "You need a name," she murmured. "He might not want you, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve one." Her mind drifted back to stories her ma used to tell, back when Emma was a girl herself, before life had turned so rough. Stories of courage and faith, names that meant something. "Hope," she said softly, felt right on her tongue. "Your name is Hope, because that's what you are, even if he can't see it." She gave the baby one last lingering look and then turned to get dressed, moving carefully, holding her side where it hurt the most. When she stepped into the kitchen, Hank was already at the table, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw covered in dark stubble. The smell of whiskey clung to him like another layer of clothes. He didn't look up when she walked in. "You're late," he muttered. Emma bit back the reminder that she had just given birth hours ago and went straight to the stove. Every action hurt, but she kept moving. Crack the eggs. Stir the pan. Place the plate in front of him. He ate in silence, his fork clinking against the metal of the plate. "You figure out what you're gonna do with it?" he finally asked, not bothering to use the word baby. Emma swallowed hard. "She's sleeping," she said. "Her name is Hope." Hank's fork froze halfway to his mouth. He stared at her slowly, the rage that had simmered the night before flickering back to life. "I don't care what you call it," he said, his voice tight. "Keep it out of my way." Emma nodded, eyes lowered, but her fingers dug into the fabric of her dress until her knuckles turned white. For 3 days, this was how it went. Emma moved through the house like a ghost, doing chores, cooking meals, tending to the baby in the quiet spaces Hank ignored. She learned how to nurse Hope with her back turned to the door, her ear tuned to every footstep. She sang to her in whispers, old lullabies her own mother had hummed when times were hard. At night, when Hank's temper and the whiskey ran together, Emma did everything she could to stay out of his path. But fear, like a storm, has a way of breaking loose. On the 4th night, the bottle was emptier than usual, and Hank's fuse was shorter. Emma had just gotten Hope to sleep in a basket by the bed when Hank stumbled into the room. His eyes went straight to the basket. "Still here, huh?" he slurred. "You act like we got room in this house for dead weight." Emma's heart thudded in her chest. "She ain't dead weight," Emma said before she could stop herself. She's a baby. She's our daughter. He was on her in 2 steps. His hand knotted in her hair and yanked her back. She cried out as he dragged her away from the bed. Don't you talk back to me? He growled, spittle flying from his mouth. You brought this curse into my house. The baby woke up and started crying, a thin, desperate sound that filled the room. Emma reached out with both hands, as if she could somehow get to the basket from where Hank held her. Hank, please, she begged. You're scaring her. Let me. He shoved her hard, and she went down, her knees slamming into the floor. Pain shot up her legs. He loomed over her. That sound? He said, pointing toward the basket with a shaking finger. I don't want to hear it anymore. Something in Emma snapped then, not like something breaking, but like something waking up. She pushed herself up on her hands, ignoring the ache in her arms and the pounding in her head. You don't get to decide if she exists, Emma said quietly. Her voice was low, steady, even though fear trembled in her chest. You don't get to decide if she cries. She's alive. She's my child. If you don't want to hear her, then you leave. The words hung in the air between them. Hank stared at her like he'd never seen her before, then his face twisted with rage. You ungrateful woman, he snarled. I took you in. I gave you my name. And this is how you repay me. He raised his hand again. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the blow. This time it didn't come. A sharp knock sounded at the front door, loud and firm, cutting through the chaos like a shot. Hank froze, his hand still raised. Another knock followed, then a voice, calm, strong, unmistakably in control. Hank Miller, it's Sheriff Cole. Come to the door. Hank cursed under his breath, lowered his hand, and stalked out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind him. Emma stayed on the floor for a second, breathing hard. Hope's cries were still rising behind her, a high, jagged sound. Emma scrambled to her feet and rushed to the basket, scooping the baby up and holding her close. It's okay, she whispered, her own body shaking. It's okay, Hope. Mama's got you. Out in the main room, the front door creaked open. Heavy bootsteps crossed the floor. Sheriff Caleb Cole had been sheriff of the small frontier town for longer than some folks had been alive. He'd buried a wife 5 winters back and a son 2 winters before that. Loss had carved quiet lines into his face, but it had also given his gaze a kind of kindness that made folks straighten their back when he looked at them. Tonight, he stood in Hank's doorway, his hat in his hand, the star pinned to his chest shining faintly in the lamplight. Evenin', Hank, he said. Hank scowled. What do you want, Sheriff? I ain't done nothin'. Didn't say you did, Cole replied, voice easy but eyes sharp. Came by 'cause Mrs. Turner from down the road said she heard some mighty awful sounds carry in on the wind. Crying. Yelling. His gaze drifted around the room, landing briefly on a broken chair. A dark stain on the wall. A bottle tipped over on the table. Thought I'd see if everything's all right. Hank forced a laugh that sounded as fake as it felt. Wind plays tricks, he said. Women get jumpy. You know how it is. Cole didn't answer right away. He just looked at Hank. That was the thing about the sheriff. He didn't always need words to make a man squirm. Finally, Cole said, You got a new baby in the house, Hank? Hank's jaw tightened. Why's that your business? Cole shrugged. This is a small town. Babies are everybody's business. Before Hank could answer, a thin wail floated from the back room. Cole turned his head toward the sound. His face softened for a split second, then went serious again. Mind if I say hello? He asked. I do mind, Hank snapped. Family matter. Sheriff or not, you don't. Cole stepped past him without waiting for permission. Hank grabbed for his arm, but Cole shook him off with a firm, deliberate movement. Now see, Cole said calmly. I came here polite. I can leave more official if I have to. Which way to the child? Hank's face flushed, rage and frustration twisting together. Back there, he muttered finally. But I ain't done nothin' wrong. Emma jerked her head up when the bedroom door opened again. For a second, fear shot through her. She thought Hank had come back. Instead, a tall man filled the doorway, his broad shoulders framed by the lamplight from the other room. His hair was brushed with gray at the temples, his face roughened by sun and time. The sheriff's star glinted on his vest. His eyes went immediately to Emma's face, then to the baby clutched in her arms, then to the darkening bruise along her cheek, the swelling on her lip, the way she held herself like everything hurt. "Ma'am," he said softly, taking off his hat. "I'm Sheriff Caleb Cole. I was in the neighborhood. Heard there was a new little one come into the world. Thought I'd offer congratulations." Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Why, yes, sir," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. This is my daughter, Hope." Cole's eyes warmed at the name, but his gaze flickered back to Emma's injuries. His jaw worked. He stepped into the room slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "She's a mighty fine name for a mighty fine baby," he said. "How you feeling, ma'am?" Emma opened her mouth, then hesitated. She'd spent years swallowing the truth, hiding it away behind forced smiles and quiet nods. That habit didn't disappear overnight. I'm fine," she started to say. Then her voice cracked on the word. The sheriff's gaze steadied on her, patient and unflinching. "You sure about that?" he asked gently. Tears stung Emma's eyes. She looked down at Hope, whose crying had softened to small hiccups. Hope's tiny hand had found the edge of Emma's dress and was clutching it like it was the only solid thing in the world. Emma drew a shaky breath. "No, sir," she whispered. "I'm not sure." There it was. Truth, small but clear. Cole nodded slowly. He didn't rush her. He didn't push. He just stood there, his presence steady as a fence post in a storm. Behind him, Hank appeared in the doorway, his face twisted, his fists clenched. "Sheriff, you got no right." "I got every right," Cole cut in calmly, not taking his eyes off Emma. "Law says I'm to keep the peace. When I hear sounds like what Mrs. Turner described, I come check. When I see bruises like that on a woman who just birthed a child, I start asking questions." Hank scoffed. "She's clumsy. Fell. Always been dramatic." Emma flinched at the lie, at how easily it rolled off his tongue. Cole's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Is that so?" he asked. His voice stayed mild, but there was steel underneath. He looked back at Emma. "Ma'am, I'm gonna ask you something, and I want you to know you don't owe me the answer. Not if you're scared. Not if you're tired. But I'm gonna ask anyway, 'cause it's my job. Did he do this to you?" The room seemed to shrink around Emma. Time slowed. Hank's presence felt like a weight pressing on her chest, but Hope's soft breath against her neck reminded her that there was more than fear in her life now. She had someone else to think about, someone who depended on her to be stronger than she felt. Emma lifted her head. Her hands trembled, but her voice, when it came, was clear enough to fill the room. "Yes," she said. Hank exploded. "You liar!" he shouted, lunging forward. Cole moved quicker than Emma would have thought possible for a man his age. His hand shot out, pushing Hank back firmly. "That's enough," Cole said, and this time there was no softness in his tone at all. "You lay another hand on her, and I'll be taking you to a cell tonight." Hank sneered. "You think a widow sheriff with no family left can tell me how to run my house?" A flash of pain crossed Cole's face at the word widowed, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Yeah," Cole said quietly. "I do. 'Cause law don't care how many folks I got waiting at home. Law cares about what's right. And beating a woman who just carried your child into this world ain't right. Not by any book I've ever read." Emma's heart thudded. Nobody had ever spoken for her like that. Not her own father, who'd married her off young to get one less mouth to feed. Not the preacher, who'd told her to be patient and honor her vows. Not the neighbors, who pretended not to see the bruises when she came to town. But here was this man, standing in her bedroom, with his star and his tired eyes, saying words that sounded like justice. Hank laughed again, but there was something desperate about it now. "What's the law gonna do, Sheriff?" he taunted. "Lock me up for disciplining my wife? You ain't got the power for that." Cole studied him for a long moment, then turned back toward Emma. His voice softened around the edges. "Ma'am," he said, "do you want to stay here? You and the baby. Do you feel safe in this house?" Emma looked at Hank. At the walls that had seen too many nights like this. At the bed that had held more tears than sleep. Then she looked down at Hope. Her daughter's dark eyes blinked up at her. Trusting, innocent. Emma thought about the life that stretched out ahead if she stayed. Years of fear. Years of excuses. Years of teaching her little girl to make herself small and silent so a man wouldn't break her. "No," Emma said quietly. The word surprised her with its strength. "I don't feel safe. Not for me. Not for her." Hank's face twisted. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled. "You're my wife. That kid's mine. You walk out that door, you ain't got nothing. You hear me? Nothing." Emma's voice shook, but she lifted her chin. "Nothing's better than this," she said, and there was a kind of tired courage in her words. Sheriff Cole nodded once, like he'd been waiting for that. "All right then," he said calmly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Hank Miller, I've already been watching you, on account of complaints from neighbors. Public drunkenness, threats, reckless behavior. You walk a fine line. But tonight," he unfolded the paper. "Tonight I got a witness, a bruised wife, a crying baby. I got cause to bring you in and let the judge sort the rest." Hank lunged again, but Cole was ready this time. In one quick, practiced movement, he twisted Hank's arm behind his back and snapped iron cuffs around his wrists. Hank cursed, struggling, but Cole held him firm. "You can't take my wife," Hank spat. "You can't take my kid." Cole leaned in close, his eyes steady. "I ain't taking them," he said. "You pushed them away yourself. All I'm doing is opening the door." He glanced back at Emma. "You and the baby, do you want to come with me? I can't promise it'll be easy. My place is small. I ain't got a woman's touch around the house no more. But I can promise you this. You won't get hit in my home. And that little girl won't grow up thinking she's a burden just for being born." Emma stared at him, her mind spinning. Go with him? To the sheriff's house? A widowed man she barely knew, except from seeing him ride through town, calm and steady, keeping the peace? It sounded like a story more than real life, like something from the tales her mother used to tell. But the ache in her ribs and the bruise on her cheek reminded her that this moment was real. The choice was real. Hope's small fingers flexed against her dress, like she was reaching for something too. "Yes," Emma said. The word came out before she could talk herself out of it. "We'll go with you." Hank let out a roar of rage, jerking against the cuffs. "You think you can just take them?" he shouted at Cole. "You think she's gonna do better with some broken-down lawman with a dead wife?" The words were meant to hurt. Emma saw them land in the tightness of Cole's shoulders, the flicker of pain in his eyes. But he didn't rise to the bait. He just gave Hank a long, steady look. "Better a broken man who's trying to be decent," Cole said quietly, "than a whole one who'd beat the mother of his child." Silence settled over the room after that, heavy and thick. The lamp flickered. Hope let out a small sigh and nestled closer to Emma's chest. Emma found herself breathing in time with her daughter, letting the tiny rhythm steady her. "All right," Cole said at last, his voice gentler again as he looked at Emma. "We're gonna walk out of this house together. Might be some talk in town. Folks always got something to say. But I want you to remember something. Them words don't define you. What you did tonight, that's what defines you. You chose better for her. That's the bravest thing I ever saw." Emma blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. Nobody had ever called her brave before. She'd always thought courage belonged to men who rode horses fast or carried guns. But here was this man saying it belonged to a woman holding a baby, standing up with shaking knees and a bruised face, refusing to stay where she was hurt. She held Hope a little tighter. "Thank you, Sheriff," she whispered, "for seeing us." Cole nodded. "It's my job," he said quietly, "but it's also my choice. And sometimes a man's choices are all that's left to say what kind of person he is." He guided Emma toward the door, moving slow so she could manage with her sore body and the baby in her arms. Hank's curses followed them down the narrow hallway, but they sounded smaller now, like they were coming from another world. When Emma stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air wrapped around her, smelling of dust and sage and something new. Freedom, maybe. The stars stretched out overhead, sharp and clear, like thousands of tiny eyes watching, bearing witness. Cole helped her down the steps, his hand steady at her elbow but never pushing, never pulling. His horse was tied up out front, a sturdy brown gelding with a white star on its forehead. Behind it, his wagon waited, simple but solid. Cole glanced at her. "You ride in the wagon with the baby," he said. "I'll tie your things in back. Whatever you want to take." Emma looked at the cabin. The cracked windows, the sagging roof, the door she'd walked through 1,000 times with her head down. "I don't have much worth talking," she said. "Just a few clothes. Her blanket. That's all." Cole nodded. "Sometimes that's all anyone needs to start over," he replied. He helped her up into the wagon, making sure she was settled before he went back inside. Emma sat there, clutching hope, watching the doorway, half afraid he wouldn't come back, or that Hank would break free somehow. But after a few minutes, Cole returned, carrying a small bundle of clothes and a worn Bible Emma's mother had given her. He placed them gently in the back of the wagon, then climbed up onto the driver's seat. "You ready?" he asked. Emma looked down at Hope. Her daughter's tiny face was relaxed now, her eyes closed, her mouth forming the smallest of smiles. Emma brushed a finger over her soft cheek. "Yeah," she whispered. "We're ready." Cole nodded, clicked his tongue, and the wagon lurched forward. The cabin grew smaller behind them, a dark shape against the night, until it disappeared completely. Emma felt something loosen in her chest, like a rope she hadn't realized was strangling her had finally been cut. They rode mostly in silence at first, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the soft jingle of the harness. The town lights glowed faintly in the distance, a cluster of warmth against the cold. Cole kept his eyes on the road, but every so often he'd glance back to make sure Emma and the baby were all right. "If you get cold," he said once, reaching behind the seat to grab a folded blanket, "you wrap up in this. Don't need you getting sick on top of everything else." Emma took the blanket, surprised by how gentle the gesture felt. She draped it over herself and Hope, tucking the edges around her daughter. "Thank you," she murmured. "You don't have to thank me," Cole replied. "Basic decency ain't something folks should have to be grateful for. But I know sometimes they are." After a while, Emma found her voice again. "You said you're a widower," she said softly. "I'm sorry." Cole exhaled slowly, the sound carrying years in it. "Yeah," he said. "My wife, Lena, passed 5 winters back. Fever hit fast. Took half the town before spring." He paused, his hands tightening on the reins. "Our boy, too. Name was Eli. He would have been about 6 now. Liked horses more than anything. Thought the sheriff's star made me some kind of hero." His voice wavered just slightly. "I couldn't save him. Learned the hard way that a badge don't mean you can stop everything bad from happening." Emma watched his shoulders, the way they sagged under an invisible weight. "You saved us," she said quietly. "Tonight you did." Cole didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was rough. "Maybe I'm just trying to make sure I don't stand by and watch something go wrong when I can do something about it," he said. "Maybe that's the only way I know how to keep living with what I lost." Emma understood that feeling more than she could say, the way pain could drive a person, shaping their choices in ways they never planned. She looked down at Hope, at the little rise and fall of her chest. "I used to think nobody was ever going to stand up for us," she admitted. "Men like Hank, they act like they own the world, like nobody's ever going to question them." Cole's jaw tightened. "That's the problem," he said. "Too many folks been quiet for too long. But things don't change until somebody decides they're done being scared. You did that tonight, ma'am. Don't forget it." The wagon rolled on, carrying them away from one life and toward another. In the darkness, with the stars overhead and the sound of the horses' steady hooves on the dirt road, Emma let herself believe something she hadn't in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, There was a place in this world where her daughter could grow up without being punished for the simple, beautiful fact of being a girl. And sitting beside a man who had lost much but still chose to protect. She wondered if that place might just start with a small house at the edge of town and a widowed sheriff who'd opened his door to both of them. By the time the wagon rolled into town, the sky was fading from black to a soft, gray blue. Lanterns still burned in a few windows. Smoke climbed from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere, and a rooster crowed like it thought it had single-handedly chased the night away. Emma had passed through this town many times before, always sitting beside Hank on the wagon seat, her head lowered, hands folded tight in her lap. The buildings had been the same. The general store, the saloon, the church, the sheriff's office. But she had always felt like she didn't belong to any of it, like she was just passing by someone else's world. This morning, wrapped in Sheriff Cole's blanket with hope cradled close, it felt different. She still didn't know exactly where she belonged, but for the first time, it felt like she was heading toward something, not just away from pain. Sheriff Cole pulled the wagon up in front of a modest house on the edge of town, close enough to the main street that you could hear the buzz of life, but far enough that it still felt like you could breathe. The house was small, with a narrow porch and a rocking chair that swayed gently in the early breeze. A few stubborn flowers were growing near the steps, their heads bowed with morning dew. Cole climbed down first, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Then he turned and held up his arms. "Let me help you down," he said. Emma shifted hope in her arms and carefully moved to the edge of the wagon. She hesitated, then let him take some of her weight as she stepped down. Pain shot through her ribs, but his grip was firm and steady. When her feet finally reached the ground, she felt wobbly, like the earth itself wasn't quite sure what to do with her being free. "This place? It's yours?" she asked, looking up at the small house. Cole nodded, glancing at it with a mix of pride and sorrow. "Yeah, built it with my own hands years back, when Lena and I first got married. Wasn't much then. Still ain't much. But it's sturdy. Roof don't leak and the stove works." There was a quiet tenderness in the way he looked at it, like he was remembering the laughter and warmth that used to live inside those walls. Emma swallowed. "You really don't mind us staying here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me and her?" Cole's eyes shifted to Hope, who blinked up at him from the safety of Emma's arms. His face softened. "I told you last night," he said. "You're welcome here. Both of you. House been too quiet for too long. Don't feel right no more. Maybe it's time it heard a baby's cry again. One that ain't a memory." He walked up the steps and pushed open the front door, creaked in a familiar, tired way. Emma followed him inside. The house was simple and neat. A small table sat in the middle of the main room with 2 chairs tucked under it. A shelf along one wall held a few books, a lantern, and a framed drawing that looked like it had been done by a child's hand. A horse with legs too long and a big, crooked smile. Emma's breath caught when she realized what it must be. Cole noticed her gaze and cleared his throat. "Eli drew that," he said quietly. "Insisted I hang it where everyone could see it. Said it'd make folks happy." He gave a faint, sad smile. He was right. Even now. Emma stepped closer, her heart aching for this boy she'd never known. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "You must have been proud." "Still am," Cole replied, his voice rough around the edges. "That don't go away." He led her toward a small doorway that opened into a narrow room. The bed inside was neatly made, the blanket pulled tight, a simple quilt folded at the end. A small wooden cradle sat in the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. Emma froze, staring at it. "I didn't know you had." Cole followed her gaze. His jaw tensed. "I should have moved it," he murmured. "I just couldn't bring myself to take it apart. Been sitting there since." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Emma stepped forward slowly, like the ground might break beneath her feet. She reached out and brushed the dust gently off the cradle's edge with the back of her fingers. The wood was smooth and warm. "May I?" she asked softly. "For Hope." Cole swallowed, then nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think Eli would have liked that." He always wanted a little sister. Something about those words settled deep inside Emma. She leaned down and gently laid Hope in the cradle. The baby squirmed, made a small sound, then relaxed, her tiny fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. Emma stood there, watching her daughter lying in a cradle built for another child. A child who hadn't gotten the chance to grow. It felt sacred, like two lives were touching for a moment. One that had ended too soon, and one that was just beginning. "Thank you," Emma whispered, more to the room and the memory of the boy than to anyone else. Cole stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on Hope. "You can rest here," he said, clearing his throat. "This room was Eli's, but it can be yours and the baby's if you'll accept it. I sleep in the front room. Ain't much, but it'll keep the wind off your backs." Emma turned to him, her chest tight. "You're giving us his room?" she asked. "You sure?" He nodded, gaze steady. "I've been keeping it like a museum," he said quietly. "But a room ain't meant to just hold ghosts. It's meant to hold life. Maybe it's time this one did again." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. She hadn't expected kindness. She hadn't expected gentleness. She hadn't expected a man to share his grief and his home just to keep her and her baby safe. "I don't know how to repay you," Emma murmured, shaking her head. "You don't owe me anything," Cole said. "You didn't ask for what that man did to you. You don't owe the world for surviving." He hesitated, then added, "If you feel like helping, you can just be here. Help keep the house in order if you're able. Talk to me when the nights get long. Let that little girl grow up knowing some folks ain't afraid to do what's right. That's payment enough." For the rest of that first day, Emma moved slowly, her body aching but her heart strangely lighter. Cole showed her where everything was, the water pump out back, the small woodpile by the shed, the pantry that held a few jars of preserved peaches and beans. He heated up leftover stew for her and insisted she sit while he ladled it into a bowl. "You're not lifting a finger for a few days," he said firmly. "Doctor would skin me alive if he saw you up and about like this so soon after birth, even without the bruises." "We can't afford a doctor," Emma said automatically. It had always been the truth with Hank. Cole just shrugged. "I didn't say anything about paying him. Doc Harris owes me more favors than I can count. I'll bring him by tomorrow to take a look at you and the baby, if that's all right." The idea of a real doctor seeing her and Hope felt unreal. That's kind," she said. "More than kind." As the sun climbed higher, a few of the town's eyes turned toward the sheriff's house. A curtain twitched here. A door cracked open there. Folks in a town this small didn't miss much, and seeing Emma, bruised, tired, but carrying a baby, walking into Cole's home with him and no husband in sight set tongues to buzzing. It didn't take long before the first knock came at the door. Cole was stacking wood by the stove when it happened. He set the logs down and glanced toward Emma. "You all right if I answer that?" he asked. Her heart jumped into her throat, memories of Hank's temper making her flinch at the sound. But this wasn't his house. This wasn't his door. "Yes," she said quickly, straightening her shoulders. "Go ahead." Cole opened the door to find Mrs. Turner from down the road standing there, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked like it might hurt. Her eyes darted past Cole and landed on Emma, who was sitting at the table with Hope in her arms. "So it's true," Mrs. Turner said, her voice not unkind, just full of that sharp curiosity old women carried like a second skin. "You brought the Miller girl here." Emma winced at the word girl. She wasn't a girl. She felt 100 years old. Still, she kept her gaze steady. "Yes, ma'am," Cole replied calmly. "This is Emma. And her daughter, Hope." Mrs. Turner sniffed, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the bruise on Emma's face and the way she held herself. "Miller's been trouble for a long time," she said. "I told my husband. I said, there's something wrong in that house. He told me to mind my own business. Men always do." She clucked her tongue softly. "You all right, child?" she asked Emma directly. Emma hesitated. It was tempting to shrug it off like she always had. To say, "I'm fine, it's nothing." But if there was one thing she'd learned in the last 12 hours, it was that truth had power. "I'm hurt," Emma said quietly. "But I'm safe now. Sheriff Cole. He helped us." Mrs. Turner's eyes flicked back to Cole, weighing him in that way older women could, deciding if he was worth the trust being placed in him. Slowly, she nodded. "'Bout time someone did," she muttered. "Men think having a wife is like having a saddle, something they can throw around, beat on, and mend up when it suits them. Glad to see at least one of you remembers it ain't supposed to be that way." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and moved toward Emma. "Let me see that baby," she said. Emma's arms tightened instinctively. Mrs. Turner noticed and softened her voice. "I won't take her," she said. "Just want to look. Seen a lot of babies in my time. Can tell when one's strong." Emma relaxed a little and adjusted Hope so the older woman could see. Mrs. Turner leaned close, her lined face softening. "Well, would you look at that?" she murmured. "Big eyes. Good lungs. From the sound of her cry last night. She's a fighter, this one." She glanced up at Emma, her expression gentle. "You did good bringing her here." Emma swallowed against the lump in her throat. "I didn't bring her," she said. "Sheriff did. I just said yes." "Sometimes saying yes to being saved is half the battle," Mrs. Turner replied. "Don't sell yourself short." She straightened, then turned to Cole. "You're gonna catch all kinds of talk, you know," she warned him. "Single man, single woman, baby that ain't yours. Folks love a good story, especially when they can make someone else the villain in it." Cole shrugged, unfazed. "Let 'em talk," he said. "They been talking about me for years. Widow sheriff with a busted heart. Can't keep his own family alive, heard it all. They'll get bored eventually." "Still," Mrs. Turner said, her eyes softening a bit toward him. "You just be ready for it. This town's got good people, but it's also got folks who use their tongues as weapons. Same as some men use their fists." Her words hung in the air. Emma thought of Hank, sitting in a cell now, probably shouting at anyone who'd listen, spinning his own story. "What'll happen to him?" she asked quietly. "Hank, I mean," Cole rubbed the back of his neck. "He'll see the judge in a day or two," he said. "I filed charges for assault, public drunkenness, threats. Now that I've got you as a witness, he's gonna have a harder time wriggling out of it." Emma's stomach twisted. "He'll be angry," she murmured. "If he gets out." Cole met her gaze. "If he gets out," he said firmly, "you won't be alone this time. He lays a hand on you, or even comes near this house with trouble in his eyes, I'll be there. And he knows now I ain't looking the other way." Mrs. Turner snorted. "He's a coward at heart," she said. "Men like him hit what they think can't hit back. You ain't that woman anymore, Emma. You got yourself a sheriff on one side and a baby girl on the other. That's more strength than you realize." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was strange at first, then slowly started to feel like something close to peace. Cole kept busy with his work, patrolling the town, handling disputes, keeping the saloon from turning into a battlefield on Saturday nights. But no matter how late he came home, he always checked on Emma and Hope before he turned in. Sometimes she pretended to be asleep, but she could feel his presence in the doorway, quiet and steady, making sure they were still breathing, still safe. Dr. Harris came by on the second day, a stout man with kind eyes and a beard that made him look older than he probably was. He examined Emma's bruises with a gentle touch and clucked his tongue in disapproval. "You're lucky nothing's broken," he said. "Ribs are bruised, not cracked. But you need rest, you hear? Real rest. No hauling water. No chopping wood. Let the sheriff do the heavy lifting for once." Emma opened her mouth to protest out of habit, but Cole spoke first. "She won't be doing anything that hurts her," he said firmly. "I'll see to it." Dr. Harris checked Hope, too, listened to her heartbeat, looked into her eyes, pressed his fingers gently against her tiny chest. "She's good and strong," he said with a smile. "Hungry too, I'd wager. That's a good sign." Emma felt relief flood her. "So she's okay?" she asked. "Truly." Truly, the doctor said. No harm came to her from this situation. You did right, holding her close the way you did. He paused, then looked at Emma more closely. You did right by leaving, too. His voice was quiet, but there was no doubt in it. After he left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and watched Hope sleep in the cradle. The baby's chest rose and fell in a tiny, perfect rhythm. Like her body knew exactly what to do even if the world around her didn't. Emma brushed a fingertip over her daughter's cheek, her heart full. You're safe now, she whispered. We're safe. But safety, she learned, didn't mean the end of struggle. It just meant a different kind. Some people in town accepted her and Hope quickly. Mrs. Turner brought over warm bread and a jar of honey. Mr. Green from the general store quietly slipped an extra measure of flour into Cole's order and pretended it was a mistake. The pastor's wife stopped by with a knitted blanket for the baby, her eyes kind and gentle. Others weren't so welcoming. Emma heard the whispers at the edge of the street, saw the way some women turned their backs or pulled their children closer when she walked by. Living with the sheriff, is she? One woman muttered to another as Emma passed. No ring on that finger. Baby in the cradle. What does that sound like to you? Sounds like trouble, the other replied. Men don't take in women like that for nothing. The words stung more than Emma expected. She'd spent so long being invisible that she'd forgotten how much it hurt to be seen the wrong way. One afternoon, about a week after she'd moved in, Emma found herself standing awkwardly in the middle of the main street with Hope wrapped against her chest. She'd come to town to pick up some thread and a bit of cloth. Mrs. Turner had offered to help her sew a proper dress for the baby, but now she stood frozen, feeling like the whole town was looking at her. Sheriff Cole was across the street, talking to a rancher about some stolen cattle. He hadn't seen the way the women at the well had looked at Emma, the half-hidden smirks, the raised brows. So she just up and left her husband? One of them whispered. What kind of wife does that? One who don't know her place, another replied. Can't imagine my Tom putting up with that. The words curled around Emma like smoke, choking, clinging. She knew she shouldn't listen. She knew she'd made the only choice she could. But years of being told she was nothing, that her job was to endure, didn't disappear overnight. She was about to turn back toward the sheriff's house when someone stepped into her path. A tall woman with red gold hair pulled back in a loose braid, stray strands curling around her face. Her dress was simple but clean, her boots well-worn but sturdy. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind. You must be Emma, the woman said. Emma stiffened, instinctively bracing for more judgment. Yes, ma'am, she replied, shifting Hope slightly. I'm sorry if we're in your way. I'm Nora Jensen. The woman interrupted, offering a small, wry smile. My husband runs the livery. I heard what happened with Hank. Emma's stomach twisted. Did you? She asked softly. Nora's eyes flicked briefly toward the cluster of whispering women by the well, then back to Emma. I heard what happened, she repeated. From Mrs. Turner. Not from them. Her tone made it clear what she thought of them. Emma didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to people talking to her like she mattered. Nora glanced at Hope, who squirmed and made a tiny sound from inside the blanket. Is this the famous Hope? She asked, her face softening. Sheriff's been saying the house is noisier in a good way since you two arrived. A strange warmth bloomed in Emma's chest at the thought of Cole talking about them like that. Yes, Emma answered. This is her. May I see? Nora asked. Emma nodded and pulled back the edge of the blanket. Hope blinked up at the stranger, her big eyes curious. Nora laughed softly. Well, aren't you something? She murmured. You got that look about you, like you came here for a reason. She looked up at Emma. You know, folks talk, she said. They always have. When I came to this town, they said my hair made me look like trouble. Said no decent woman laughed as loud as I did, or rode as fast. She shrugged. Turns out, their opinions didn't pay my rent or feed my kids. So I decided not to care. The words landed in Emma's heart like seeds on freshly turned soil. It's hard, she admitted quietly. Hearing them, I know I did what I had to, but... Nora nodded. But their voices get in your head, she finished. I know. Here's a trick I learned. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. When they talk, imagine every word they speak as something they've got to carry. Little stones piling up in their pockets, weighing them down, keeping them from walking very far out of their own small lives. But you left a man who hurt you. You protected your baby. You walked into a new home with your head up. That's weight of a different kind. That's strength. Emma looked at her, startled by how much she wanted to believe those words. You think I was strong? She asked. Nora's grin widened. Honey, you moved into the sheriff's house with half this town watching and didn't turn back. That's what I call brave. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Before Emma could answer, Sheriff Cole crossed the street toward them. His eyes went first to Emma, scanning her face, her posture, the way she held hope, like he was checking, without words, that she was all right. Then he nodded politely at Nora. Mrs. Jensen, he said. Sheriff, she replied. Just making sure your new house guests are getting the proper welcome. Cole snorted softly. Half the town's making sure of that one way or another, he said. His eyes flicked toward the women by the well, then softened when they came back to Emma. You about done here? He asked her. I can walk you home. Emma hesitated, then nodded. Yes, she said. She glanced at Nora. Thank you, she added quietly. Nora squeezed her arm lightly. You come by the livery sometime, she said. Bring Hope. My youngest loves babies. She'll be overjoyed to fuss over yours for a while. Give you a chance to breathe. For the first time in a long time, Emma found herself actually smiling. I'd like that, she said. Nora winked. Good. Then we'll expect you. As Emma and Cole walked back toward the house, the whispers behind them rose again. But this time, they felt softer, less sharp. Emma focused on the sound of Cole's boots beside her and the weight of hope against her chest, on the warmth of Nora's words still echoing in her head. After a few moments, Cole spoke. They been bothering you? He asked quietly. He didn't look at her, but she could feel the tension in his jaw. Emma thought about lying, saying no. Everything was fine. Instead, she took a breath. Some of them, she admitted. They say things. About us. About me. Cole's mouth pressed into a thin line. People like to fill in gaps they don't understand with stories, he said. Doesn't mean those stories are true. I know, Emma said. It just hurts. Sometimes I feel like I traded one kind of beating for another. Fists for words. Cole stopped walking. Emma turned to face him. His eyes were steady, serious. Emma, he said quietly, I can't stop people from talking. If I could, this town would be a lot quieter. But I can tell you this, what you did was right. You hear me? Right. The kind of right that matters when you look back on your life at the end and ask yourself if you did the best you could. He paused, searching for the right words. You don't owe them shame, he said. You don't owe them explanations. Only person you owe anything to is that little girl in your arms. And yourself. Make choices you can be proud of. Let them choke on their gossip if they must. You just keep living. Emma felt her eyes burn with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of pain. Why are you being so good to us? She asked, the question escaping before she could catch it. You barely knew me. You could have left us there. You didn't have to take us in. Cole looked away for a moment, toward the hills beyond town. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Every night since Lena and Eli passed, he said slowly, I've asked myself if there was something more I could have done, some way I could have saved them. Doc said there wasn't. Fever took almost everyone it touched. But that question stayed. It doesn't listen to reason. He drew a breath. So when I heard those cries and saw those bruises on your face, he went on, I realized something. Maybe I couldn't save my own family, but I could save someone. I could step in instead of walking away. And if I let you go back to that house, back to that man, I'd be the one who had to live with it. I'm tired of living with things I didn't do. Emma listened in silence, her heart aching for his losses, for the weight he carried alone in that quiet house before they came. "You did save someone," she said softly. "You saved us." Cole's gaze came back to her, his eyes tired but clear. "Then maybe that's enough for now," he replied. "Maybe that's how I keep going." The days turned into weeks. Emma's bruises faded from dark purple to yellow, then disappeared altogether, but the memories stayed. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the windows just right, she'd wake up in a cold sweat, clutching hope, thinking she was back in that cabin with Hank's shadow filling the doorway. On those nights, she'd step quietly into the main room, where Cole often sat in his chair by the fire, a cup of coffee in his hands, staring at the flames like they were telling him a story only he could hear. He never acted surprised to see her. He'd just shift slightly, make room for her in the quiet. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the sleeping town around them. One night, as winter crept closer and the air outside bit at their noses, Emma found her voice. "Do you ever get tired of carrying everyone else's burdens?" she asked, watching the fire. Cole thought about it. "All the time," he said honestly. "Being sheriff ain't just about catching thieves and stopping fights. It's about knowing when a man drinks because he's mean and when he drinks because he's broken. It's about seeing a boy make a mistake and deciding whether to throw him in a cell or give him one more chance. It's about hearing a woman cry in the middle of the night and asking yourself how long you can pretend you didn't." He shifted, looking at her. "But I also see the flip side," he added. "The day a young man sobers up and thanks me for not giving up on him. The time two feuding families finally shake hands because I locked them in the same room till they did. The moment a woman with a baby in her arms walks through my door and decides not to go back to the man who hurt her." His eyes softened. "Those moments, they're heavy too, but it's a weight I'll carry gladly." Emma stared at the fire, her heart full and aching. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked. "Not as the sheriff, just as a man." Cole was quiet for a long time. The fire snapped and popped. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked as it settled. "I did once," he said finally. "Thought about leaving this town after Lena and Eli passed. Thought about heading west, starting where nobody knew my name. But every time I packed my bag in my head, I kept seeing folks I'd leave behind. Old Mr. O'Reilly, who needs someone to keep his son in line. Mrs. Turner and her big mouth and bigger heart. The kids who run through the street and know they can wave at the sheriff and feel safe." He glanced at her. "And now there's you. And hope. Feels wrong to run now. Feels like I'd be walking away from something I'm meant to stand for." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She looked down at her hands, turning his words over in her mind. She'd never been something someone stayed for before. Never been anything but a burden in Hank's eyes, a duty in her father's. The idea that someone might choose to remain because she and her daughter were here felt almost impossible to believe. "You don't owe us that," she said quietly. "You don't owe us anything." "Maybe not," Cole replied. "But I owe myself the chance to be the kind of man they remember for more than just wearing a badge." His gaze drifted to the cradle in the next room, where Hope slept peacefully. "And I owe that little girl at least one man in her life who never raises his hand in anger." As the weeks stretched into months, the town slowly adjusted. The whispers didn't stop entirely, but they softened. People got used to seeing Emma stepping out onto the sheriff's porch, baby in her arms, hair loose around her shoulders. They got used to the sight of Cole carrying extra groceries home, or fixing the cradle when it wobbled, or walking just a half step closer to Emma when the street was crowded. Some folks still judged. Some folks always would. But others started to see something else taking shape. A new kind of family, forged not by blood or tradition, but by choice and courage and the quiet, steady work of healing. One chilly morning, close to the start of winter, Emma stood by the window, watching the first thin dusting of snow settle over the town. The rooftops looked softer, the dirt street turned pale. Children ran outside with delighted shouts, trying to catch flakes in their hands. Hope, now a few months old, gurgled happily in Emma's arms, fascinated by the white world beyond the glass. Cole came up behind them, carrying a mug of coffee in each hand. Looks like it'll be a cold one this year, he said. Snow this early means we're in for a long winter. Emma turned and took the mug he offered her, the warmth seeping into her sore fingers. I guess we'll be spending a lot of time inside, she said, glancing around the small but cozy room. Good thing this house feels safe. She met his eyes, letting the word linger. He held her gaze for a beat longer than usual, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then he nodded. Safe's what I was aiming for, he said softly. For both of you. Hope squealed suddenly, reaching toward Cole with chubby hands, her tiny fingers opening and closing in the air like she was calling him closer. Cole's face broke into a rare, genuine grin. Well, would you look at that, he said. I think someone's decided I'm acceptable company. Emma laughed, a clear, bright sound she barely recognized as her own. Looks like you've been approved by the highest authority in the house, she teased. Cole stepped closer, carefully taking Hope from her arms. He held the baby like she was something both fragile and powerful, his big hands steady under her small body. Hey there, little one, he murmured. You watching the snow? First winter of many, I hope. The words slipped out naturally, but Emma heard the wish inside them. Many winters, many mornings like this, a life built not on fear, but on shared moments, small and quiet and precious. As she watched Cole bounce Hope gently, her heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something that scared her a little, because it felt like the beginning of love. Not the kind of love she'd been taught growing up, where a girl gave everything and got bruises in return. Not the kind that burned fast and bright, then left ashes. This felt slower, steadier, like standing on solid ground after years of walking on shifting sand. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know what the judge would decide about Hank, or what the town would say if she and Cole ever decided to call what they were building a family out loud. But she knew this, her daughter was safe. She was seen. And for the first time in her life, Emma could look at herself in the mirror and see not just a survivor, but a woman who had chosen dignity when the world tried to deny it to her. That night, after Hope had fallen asleep and the house was wrapped in a soft, peaceful silence, Emma stepped out onto the porch. The snow had stopped, but the ground was still dusted white, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting her lungs, but it felt clean, honest. Cole joined her a moment later, pulling his coat tighter around his shoulders. You should be inside, he said quietly. You just got over that cough. Emma shook her head. Just needed a minute, she replied, to take it all in. They stood side by side, looking out at the town. The saloon's lantern was still burning, casting a warm rectangle of light on the street. The church steeple cut a dark shape against the sky. Somewhere, a wolf howled in the distance, but it sounded far away, no longer at her door. Sheriff, Emma said softly. Caleb. He turned his head slightly at the sound of his first name on her lips. She'd only used it a handful of times. Each one felt like crossing a small bridge. Yes? He asked. She took a breath, watching it fog in the cold air. I know this all started because you were doing your job, she said, fulfilling your duty. But what you've done for us, for me and Hope, it's more than that. You didn't just keep the peace. You gave us a chance to have one. She paused, searching for the right words. I want you to know, she said slowly, that I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to raise her to be proud of who she is. To know that being a girl isn't a curse. It's a gift. And I'm going to make sure she knows there was a man who showed her that from the moment she was born. Cole's throat worked. He looked away for a moment, blinking hard. When he looked back at her, there was something fierce and gentle all at once in his eyes. Then I'll consider that my greatest success as sheriff, he said quietly. Not the men I arrested or the fights I stopped, but the little girl who grows up in that room, knowing she's valued. They stood there, the widowed sheriff and the battered woman who had found her courage, looking out over a town that was slowly learning to see them differently. The night stretched wide around them, full of uncertainty and promise. For Emma, fear was still there, tucked into the corners of her mind like shadows that hadn't quite faded. But standing beside Caleb, hearing Hope's soft breathing through the open window behind them, she realized something deeply, quietly true. Fear might have shaped her past, but it didn't own her future. That belonged to her now. To her and the tiny girl who had arrived unwanted in one man's eyes and been welcomed with open arms by another. In the stillness, with snow underfoot and stars overhead, Emma made a silent promise, to herself, to her daughter, and maybe to the man standing beside her, that she would spend every day from here forward walking in that promise, with dignity, with courage, and with the steady, stubborn hope that had been placed in her arms the night the wind howled and everything changed. The winter that followed was the kind that pressed down on the town like a heavy blanket. Snow piled up against doorsteps and drifted across the road. The wind slipped through cracks in the walls, testing every house for weakness. Folks chopped twice the firewood they thought they'd need and still found themselves out by February. But inside the sheriff's house, the cold months brought something Emma had almost forgotten was possible. A kind of warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Hope grew fast. By the time the deepest snow came, she was big enough to hold her head up and grab at anything within reach. Emma's hair, Cole's fingers, the edge of her blanket. She'd sit on a folded quilt by the fire, babbling nonsense sounds that made both adults laugh, like she was telling them secrets in a language they hadn't learned yet. Cole built her a little wooden rattle one evening, carving it by lamplight at the table. His rough hands moved carefully, smoothing every edge before sliding the small piece across to Emma. You and Mr. Green settle that boundary argument. Cole dropped down to sit on the porch, legs stretched out. More or less, he said. Told him if they didn't stop fussing over 6 inches of land, I'd plant a tree in the middle and make it belong to neither of them. Emma laughed, the sound light. You wouldn't. No, he admitted. But they don't know that. He looked at her for a long moment, the easy humor fading into something more serious. I've been thinking, he began. Emma's needle paused mid-stitch. About what? She asked, suddenly wary. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. About this, he said. Judge drew it up. Gave it to me after Hank's hearing. Told me to think on it before I said anything to you. Emma's heartbeat picked up. What is it? Cole held it out to her. Permission for legal guardianship, he said. For Hope. Not taking away your rights. Never that. But giving me the right to protect her, too. On paper. So if Hank ever tries anything when he's out, if he tries to claim her just because of blood, he'll find out the law don't see it that way anymore. The judge said, with your consent, he'd sign off. Make it official that this is her home. Emma stared at the paper, her vision blurring for a moment. She'd known, deep down, that the day would come when Hank would be free to walk the streets again. The idea of him showing up, demanding what he'd never really wanted, just to punish her, had haunted her nights. You'd do that? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Take on that responsibility? Take that kind of stand against him? Cole nodded once. I already did, in all the ways that matter, he said quietly. This just makes the rest of the world admit it. She looked down at Hope, who was now banging her spoon on the porch, completely unaware that her future was being shaped just a few feet above her head. Emma thought about the day her daughter had been born, about the way Hank had looked at her like she was a curse. She thought about the blows she'd taken to shield that tiny body. And she thought about every gentleness she'd seen from Cole since that night. Every late-night check, every carved toy, every time he'd stepped a little closer when the world seemed too big. Slowly, with hands that trembled only a little, Emma reached out and took the paper. I want that, she said. I want her protected. I want the law to say out loud what she already knows in her heart. That this is her home. That you are... She hesitated, then finished honestly. Her father in the ways that count. Cole exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for weeks. All right then, he said, his voice low. We'll go see the judge tomorrow. We'll make it right. The next day, they went to the small courthouse together. Emma wore her best dress. The one she'd fixed so many times she'd practically remade it. Hope rode on Cole's hip, tugging happily at his collar. The judge looked down at them from behind his desk, his sharp eyes softening when they landed on Hope. She looks well, he said. Healthy. Happy. She is, Emma replied, standing a little straighter. Because of us. Because of him. She glanced at Cole. We want to make that official. The judge studied them for a long moment. The widowed sheriff, the former battered wife, the baby who had somehow tied their lives together. Then he nodded. Sometimes family isn't what you're born into, he said. It's what's built from what's broken. I'll sign it. When they left the courthouse, Emma held the signed paper in her hands and felt like she was carrying something sacred. It wasn't just ink and words. It was a shield. It was a statement. It told the world that her daughter's worth was not up for debate, that she'd been chosen, that she had someone besides her mother who would stand in front of a judge and say, "She is mine to protect." That evening, as the sun melted into gold behind the hills, Emma sat at the table, the guardianship paper smoothed out in front of her. Hope slept in the cradle. Cole was washing up at the basin, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, forearms wet. The quiet felt full, as if the house itself knew something important had happened. "Caleb," she said softly. He looked over his shoulder. "Yeah." Emma swallowed, nerves fluttering in her chest. "When I first came here, I told myself I was just borrowing your kindness," she said. "I told myself I'd stay until I could stand on my own 2 feet, until the bruises faded, until things settled." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. But somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like a place I was borrowing. It started feeling like, her voice wobbled, home. Cole listened without moving, water dripping slowly from his fingers into the basin. "I'm glad it feels that way to you," he said, his voice quiet. "It feels that way to me, too. It didn't before you came." Emma took a breath. "I don't want to leave," she admitted, the words falling out like a confession. "Not when I'm stronger. Not when I have more money in that tin. Not ever. Not unless you tell us to." The room seemed to hold its breath. Cole dried his hands slowly on a towel, then crossed the small space between them. He didn't sit. He just stood there, close enough that she could see the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. "Emma," he said, and her name in his voice felt like something solid she could lean on. "I ain't ever going to tell you to leave. Not unless you decide you want something different and this house holds you back from it. This place is as much yours now as mine. You and Hope, you turned it back into a home." He hesitated, then added, "I know folks talk. I know they'll talk more if I say what I'm thinking. But I've learned it don't matter what they whisper if I can live with what I say out loud." Her heart pounded. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He drew a slow breath, steadying himself. "I'm thinking," he said, "that I don't just want to be the man who took you and your baby in. I don't just want to be the sheriff who guards your door. He paused, searching her face, giving her time to pull back if she needed to. "I care about you, Emma. You and Hope. I care about the way your laugh makes this old house feel less empty. I care about the way you hum when you cook. I care about the way you look at that little girl like she's the center of the universe. And I care about the way she looks at me." He swallowed hard. "I ain't asking for an answer tonight. Maybe you don't feel the same. Maybe it's too soon. But if there comes a day when you're ready to build something more, if you ever want to share more than just a roof and a legal guardianship." His voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Emma's chest felt tight, full of so many emotions she could hardly name them. Fear, yes, because love had hurt her before. But there was something else too: trust. Admiration. The quiet, blooming warmth that had been growing inside her over all these months. She thought of the night he'd walked into that broken bedroom, hat in hand, eyes full of concern. She thought of every morning since, every act of simple decency that had added up into something bigger than kindness. "You want to know what I'm thinking?" she whispered. Cole nodded once. "Yes." Emma took a step closer, closing some of the space between them. "I'm thinking that the only reason I can imagine leaving this house," she said, "is if it was with you, not away from you." His breath caught. She smiled then, small but sure. "I used to think love was something you survived," she went on. Something you endured. Something that took from you until there was nothing left. But here, with you, I'm starting to think maybe love can be something else. Something that gives back. Something that protects. Her eyes shone. I'm not ready to promise anything more tonight. I'm still healing parts of myself I didn't even know were broken. But I can tell you this, clear as I know my own name. I want to keep walking this road with you. I want Hope to grow up seeing us choose each other every day, not out of obligation, but out of respect, out of care, out of whatever this is turning into. Cole's shoulders eased, some tension she hadn't noticed leaving him. He nodded once, like something inside him had settled. That's enough for me, he said quietly. More than enough. He didn't reach for her. He didn't rush. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, and let the moment be what it was. Two people, bruised by life but not broken, standing together in a small house at the edge of town, choosing hope. Later that night, after the lamps were turned low and the house had gone quiet, Emma stood by the cradle and watched Hope sleep. The guardianship paper lay folded in the Bible on the nightstand, a promise tucked between pages of older promises. Emma brushed hair off her daughter's forehead and whispered softly, "You were never a curse. You were the beginning." Outside, the town settled into its own restless sleep, unaware that in one small house, a new kind of story was being written. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. It was lined with scars and haunted by what-ifs. But it was theirs, built from choices made in the face of fear, from courage learned the hard way, from a sheriff who refused to look away and a woman who refused to stay down. In the years to come, folks would tell different versions of it. Some would say, "Remember when the widowed sheriff took in that woman and her baby? The talk that caused." Others would say, "Remember how he stood up to Hank Miller? How he wouldn't let that man break her." But the version that mattered lived inside the walls of that little house, in the everyday moments. The shared meals, the soft lullabies, the laughter around the table, the arguments and apologies that any real family has. In those moments, Hope grew up understanding something most people took a lifetime to learn. That dignity isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you claim even when your voice shakes. That justice isn't always big speeches and courtroom scenes. Sometimes it's a man showing up at your door when the world is crashing down and saying, "Come with me." And that being born a girl was never, ever a reason to be punished. It was a reason to be cherished. And in the quiet of one long, ordinary night, as the sheriff dozed in his chair and Emma hummed softly by the cradle, the future opened just a little wider for a child who had been beaten for existing only in the ugliest thoughts of a broken man, but had been held, defended, and chosen by a better one. The years slipped by in a way that felt slow while they were happening and fast when Emma looked back on them. Seasons turned one into the next. Winters blew hard and white. Summers baked the town in dry heat that made the boards of the houses creak. Through it all, the sheriff's house on the edge of town stayed steady, its porch boards worn smooth by footsteps, its windows glowing warm in the evenings. Inside, Hope grew. By the time she was 5, Hope was a whirlwind of energy with tangled hair and a laugh that rang through the house like a bell. She followed Cole everywhere she could, her small boots thumping along behind his much larger ones. If he went to the barn, she was right there, begging to see the horses. If he sat at the table to clean his rifle, she'd climb onto a chair and ask a million questions about how it worked and why he needed it. Emma would watch them together, her heart full. "You're spoiling her," she'd say sometimes, half teasing, as she folded laundry at the table. Cole would glance up, a faint smile pulling at his mouth as Hope tugged on his arm, asking him to tell the story again about the wild horse he'd once helped round up. "Maybe," he'd answer, "but if any child ever deserved spoiling, it's this one." Hope loved stories. At night, she'd curl up in Emma's lap or on a small pallet by the fire and demand them in that serious way only children can. "Tell me about when I was born," she'd ask. The first time she said it, Emma flinched, the memories rising up sharp and painful. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, heart pounding. Cole caught her eye across the room. His gaze was gentle, steady. "You don't have to," he said softly. "Not if you're not ready." Emma looked down at Hope's eager face, at the trust in her daughter's eyes. She realized then that the story didn't have to belong to Hank. It didn't have to be about violence. Could be about something else. It was hers to tell. You were born on a night when the wind howled louder than it had in years. Emma began slowly. Hope's eyes went wide. Like a wolf? She asked. Emma smiled faintly. Yes, she said. Like a whole pack of them. The house shook. The windows rattled. And in the middle of all that noise and fear, there you were. Tiny and new and loud enough to give that wind a run for its money. You cried so strong. I knew right then you were a fighter. She skipped over the parts that still hurt too much. Instead, she told her daughter how the sheriff had come, how he'd wrapped them in a blanket, how he'd taken them out of a place that was breaking them and brought them somewhere safe. So I was born in the wind, Hope said happily when the story was done. And then Sheriff Cole carried me like a hero in a story. Emma smoothed her daughter's hair. He did, she said. He still does. Hope turned to Cole, who was listening from his chair by the fire. Is that true? She asked. Did you carry us like a hero? Cole rubbed the back of his neck, a little embarrassed. I don't know about hero, he said. But I did carry you. You were so small. I was afraid I'd break you just by holding you. Hope giggled. You didn't, she said. You did good. The unself-conscious praise made his throat tighten. He tipped his hat over his eyes for a moment, pretending he needed to adjust it. Emma saw the emotion there and felt her own eyes sting in response. As Hope grew older, questions started to grow with her. At first, they were small and easy to answer. Why is the sky blue? Why do horses sleep standing up sometimes? Why does Mrs. Turner always talk so loud? But as the years passed, the questions sharpened. One evening, when Hope was about 7, she sat at the table, swinging her legs and scratching numbers onto a scrap of paper as Emma helped her with her sums. The lamplight made a halo around her head. Cole was by the window, checking over a report from the day. Hope looked up suddenly. Mama? She asked. Why do I have 2 names? Emma paused. 2 names? She repeated, confused. What do you mean? Hope frowned thoughtfully. At school, Miss June reads the list, she said. She called me Hope Miller the first day. I told her my name is Hope Cole. She asked me which one was on my birth paper. She wrinkled her nose. I didn't know. I just said my name is Hope. Then Tommy Green said that sometimes children have one name when they're born and another when their mama marries again. He said that means their real daddy is somewhere else. She looked between Emma and Cole, her eyes suddenly vulnerable. Is my name Miller or Cole? And who is my real daddy? The words landed heavy in the room. Emma felt her heart lurch. She'd known this day would come. For years, she'd pushed it into the future, too scared to hold it. Now it stood in front of her, wearing a small dress and swinging its feet. She looked at Cole. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were gentle. He gave the slightest nod, like he was saying, It's all right. Tell her. Emma set down the pencil and moved around the table to kneel, so she was eye level with her daughter. Hope, she said softly. You were born with the name Miller. That was the last name of the man I used to be married to. He is the man who gave you life, the one whose blood runs in your veins. Hope studied her face. Is he my real daddy? She asked. Emma swallowed. He is your father by blood, she said carefully. But he was not a good man. He hurt people. He hurt me. He did not want you. He was angry that you were a girl. He thought that made you less. Hope's eyes flashed. That's stupid, she said immediately. Girls aren't less. Emma's voice shook slightly as she continued. You're right. Girls aren't less. But he believed that, and sometimes beliefs like that turn into cruelty. The night you were born, he raised his hand to hurt us. The sheriff stopped him. He took us away. He protected us. He chose to care for you, even though he didn't have to. She glanced at Cole. Years ago, the judge signed papers saying that in the eyes of the law, Sheriff Cole has a right to protect you, that this is your home, that he is your guardian. And then, She hesitated just a second. A while after that, he and I decided to be a family in another way, too. Hope blinked. You mean when you got married? She asked. Cole smiled faintly from the doorway, memories flickering behind his eyes. The wedding had been simple, held in the church with the town gathered, some smiling, some whispering, some still unsure. Emma had worn a plain dress Nora helped her alter. Cole had worn his best shirt and his badge. Hope had stood between them, holding both their hands. Yes, Emma said now. When we married, we decided you didn't just belong to one of us. You belonged to both. That's when we started calling you Hope Cole. Hope's face scrunched up as she thought it through. So which one is my real daddy? She whispered. The ache in her voice made Emma's heart twist. Before Emma could answer, Cole walked over and crouched down beside them. His eyes were steady, his voice low. May I say something? He asked. Hope nodded quickly. Yes, please. Cole took a slow breath. Blood can make a man a father, he said carefully. But it can't make him a good one. A real daddy is the one who shows up. The one who tucks you in at night, teaches you right from wrong, works hard to keep you fed and warm. The one who'd stand between you and anything that tried to hurt you. He paused, his gaze softening. The man you were born from, he didn't do those things. He didn't protect you. He didn't want to. That is his failure, not yours. He tapped his chest lightly. I ain't your father by blood. But I mean every word I gave the judge, every word I spoke at that altar. I choose you, Hope, every day. If you choose to call me Daddy, then that's real. As real as anything in this world. Hope studied his face for a long moment with those bright, searching eyes. Then she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Okay, she said simply. You're my real daddy then. Her voice wobbled just a little. 'Cause you stayed. Cole's arms came up around her automatically, holding her close. His eyes shone with tears he didn't bother to hide. Emma watched them, her own vision blurring. Something in her that had been tight and guarded for so long finally eased. Just a little more. As for your name, Emma added gently, brushing a curl away from Hope's cheek. Miller might be on some old papers, but Cole is what we use. It's who you are now. Not because you belong to him like a thing, but because you belong with us. Because this family is yours. The next day, Emma walked Hope to school. When Miss June read the list and said, Hope Miller, Hope stood up, shoulders squared in a way that reminded Emma of herself on the stand years ago. My name is Hope Cole, she said clearly. The whispering that rippled through the classroom made Emma's stomach tighten for a moment. She waited, ready to step forward if she had to. Miss June studied Hope for a breath, then nodded. Very well, the teacher said. Hope Cole it is. She made a note on the paper. As Emma walked home alone, her feet on the dusty street, she realized that this was what all those painful choices had been building toward. Not just her own safety, but her daughter's ability to stand and name herself without flinching. Not everyone accepted it so easily. One afternoon, as Emma was buying flour at the general store, she heard two women near the barrels of nails whispering. I still say it isn't right, one said. That child bearing another man's name, living in another man's house. The other sniffed. World's upside down, that's what. In my day, people knew their place. Emma felt anger flare hot in her chest, but it didn't burn the way fear had. This was different. This was clean. She turned and walked over, meeting their surprised eyes steadily. In your day, she said quietly but firmly, did women get beaten for giving birth to a girl? Did folks look the other way when they heard cries coming from a neighbor's house? One of the women flushed. The other opened her mouth, then shut it. Caught. Emma continued, voice steady. Maybe the world needed to turn upside down a little. Maybe some of us were standing on the ceiling for too long, trying to pretend it was the floor. Said there's a need for more teachers, especially ones who aren't afraid to teach girls more than cooking and sewing. She looked at Emma. She said I'd be good at it. Emma's heart skipped. What do you think? She asked. Hope sat down, fingers tracing circles on the table. I don't want to get married just because that's what girls are supposed to do. she said slowly. If I do it, I want it to be like you and Daddy. Because it feels right. Because there's respect. She glanced at Cole, eyes full of quiet admiration. But I like learning. I like talking. I like helping people understand the world a little better. When Tommy Green finally apologized to Sarah down the street after I explained why his words hurt her, it felt important. Like the way you feel, Daddy, when you say justice is everyone's business. She took another breath. I think I want to teach. I want to help girls and boys grow up knowing that being kind and fair is as important as knowing how to add or read. The room was silent for a moment. Then Cole stood slowly. He walked over and placed his hands gently on Hope's shoulders. If that's what you want, he said, I will stand behind you every step of the way. You will be one of the finest teachers this town has ever seen. Emma nodded, tears in her eyes. You'll be the kind of teacher who looks at the girl in the back corner with fear in her eyes and knows what she's carrying, she said softly. The kind who notices the boy who's always angry and wonders what's happening at home before calling him bad. Hope swallowed, emotion flickering across her face. I won't be able to save everyone, she whispered. No, Cole agreed gently. You won't. I couldn't either, even with this badge. But you'll reach some. You'll plant seeds. You'll make sure that in this town, at least, there's someone telling children that their worth isn't measured by the bruises they hide or the names they're called. Later that night, as the house quieted, Emma stepped out on the porch, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the chill. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like someone had thrown a handful of glitter into the dark. Footsteps sounded behind her, steady and familiar. Cole joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She's going to be all right, he said softly. It wasn't a question. Emma smiled, eyes on the sky. She is, she agreed, because she grew up in a house where people listened, where she saw a man use his strength to protect, not to harm. Because she learned that her voice matters. She paused, then added in a quieter tone. Because on a night when the wind howled and I thought everything was ending, you knocked on the door and everything began. Cole let out a slow breath, his gaze moving over the quiet town below. I did my duty that night, he said, but it turned into more than that. Into a life I didn't know I'd get to have again. Emma turned to look at him. The lines on his face were deeper now. There was more gray at his temples. Time had left its marks on both of them. But his eyes were the same, steady, kind, stubborn. We did this together, she said gently. You and me, and her. She pulled us forward. We followed. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the town settling. A dog barking, a door closing, the faint, sweet tune of someone playing a fiddle inside a nearby home. The kind of ordinary noises that, once upon a time, had sounded like a world she wasn't part of. Now they sounded like home. Do you ever regret anything? Emma whispered, half afraid of the answer. Cole thought about it, his breath clouding in the cool air. I regret that I didn't see sooner, he said finally. Didn't hear sooner. Your cries. Other people's. I regret the years I spent thinking my job was just about locking up drunks and chasing thieves. Not about stepping in when the harm was quieter, hidden behind closed doors. He paused, then shook his head lightly. But taking you in? Loving you? Loving Hope? No, not for a second. Emotion swelled in her chest, almost too big to hold. I used to think I was broken beyond repair, she said softly. That what happened to me and to her would be the only story people ever saw when they looked at us. But now, she looked back through the doorway, where Hope sat at the table, bent over a book, lips moving silently as she read. Now I think it's just the first chapter, the hard one that makes the rest matter more. Cole nodded. She'll carry pieces of it with her, he said. Your story, mine, this town's. But she'll also write her own. And if we've done our job right, she'll write it with her head up. The wind picked up a little cool against their faces. Emma pulled her shawl tighter and leaned just slightly into him. He didn't move away. If anything, he shifted closer, their shoulders touching now, their warmth shared. Below them, the town that had once whispered about them now turned its lights down, one window at a time. Inside the house, hope turned a page, the soft rustle barely audible. A new generation learning, growing, preparing to step into a world that had hurt her family once but hadn't managed to keep them down. In the end, the story of the woman who'd been beaten for birthing a girl and the widowed sheriff who took them in wasn't just about rescue. It was about what came after, the long, quiet work of healing, of facing old wounds and refusing to let them define the future. It was about a girl who grew up knowing that her birth wasn't a mistake but a turning point. About a town pulled, sometimes kicking and screaming, toward a better understanding of justice and dignity. Years later, when folks spoke of Emma and Sheriff Cole and their daughter, they didn't just talk about the night of the storm. They talked about the woman who stood up in the general store and refused to accept shame. About the sheriff who set an example for the boys who watched how he treated his wife and daughter. About the teacher named Hope Cole who sat on the edge of a desk and told her students, "You matter. All of you. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise." The West had always been a place of hard edges. But in one small town, in one modest house with a narrow porch and a rocking chair that swayed in the evening breeze, something softer had taken root. Something stubborn. Something enduring. Call it love. Call it courage. Call it justice. Call it the simple, powerful belief that no child should ever be punished for the way they were born, and no woman should ever be left alone with her pain. Whatever name you give it, it was there. In the way Emma held her head high, in the way Cole kept his hand gentle even on the roughest days, in the way Hope stepped into her own life with clear eyes and a strong voice. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, in the quiet place where all their stories met, it was there in the memory of a night when the wind howled and someone finally answered a cry that had gone unheard for far too long. If we ever expand, add prequels or adjust earlier parts, this ending will stay exactly the same in spirit. Emma healed and respected Sheriff Cole as her steady partner and Hope's real father in all the ways that matter. Hope growing into a strong, justice-minded young woman, the town slowly changing toward dignity and fairness.